and rail operations, and we'll start with Chris Loder.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Secretary of State. Good morning, Gareth and Bernadette. It's good to see you both again, and good to see you for the first time. Can I ask you, Secretary of State, first of all, is it your intention to fully implement the plan for rail?
So, as I said, because we can't bring in this kind of big, all-encompassing piece of legislation immediately, we're going to take the opportunity to break it down to its constituent parts and work out how we can drive forward some of that modernisation.
Is it your intention, and I appreciate you have to face it, but is it your intention to fully implement that plan?
So what I want to make sure we do is fully implement the modernisation so that we have got something that's genuinely fit for purpose. One of the challenges to Kevin of bringing the whole the whole rail brief together so that every component part is there is to make sure that we have thought about that holistically and indeed for the long term, to make sure that, as we've said it many times, the passenger, the freight provider is at the heart of the service that we want to be providing. So we have the opportunity, sadly in a way, because there's a pause, but it's the nature of legislation, to actually make sure that we are looking at that holistically, and that we are going to, with what we bring forward, really have the customer at the heart of the whole framework. So, but in doing that, we want to try and break down what we can do more quickly.
Thank you. So, would it be fair to say that it would be wrong for us to expect the full plan to be implemented by early 2024, as I think an earlier rail minister suggested to the committee?
That's probably a fair call, isn't it, realistically?
I think in the absence of legislation to the timetable that we had been planning, then it is very difficult for us to implement all of the changes necessary, which require legislation to establish GBR.
That's very helpful. So just so I'm clear then, in order to fully implement the plan, you would require a transport bill and legislation to do it. Can you tell us what you can deliver without the legislative
so the breakdown of the experts.
With reference to that, Chris had an excellent exchange with somebody in the department who took over when the last rail minister was with us, who was explaining how you could actually deliver all of this creatively without the need for legislation. So perhaps you can wrap that in, Dame Bernard.
Well, I will try. Unfortunately, I wasn't there for that exchange. I don't have it in front of me, and I may just resend it some parts. But I mean, clearly there are sort of key elements of structural change and the establishment of GBR which require legislation, including, for example, I think the formal transfer of franchising powers from the government, from the DfT, to another entity. So there clearly are some things that we can't fully do structurally without legislation and without
that's fine.
Those powers.
So just so we're all clear, what we're basically saying is that you will need legislation to change the franchising powers from the DfT to GBR.
I believe that is one of the critical. That is one of the. I mean, actually, my recollection is the legislation, of course, for GBR is relatively short. There's not, it's not very, very long, complicated legislation, but there is a lot of change we can achieve without legislation.
So, Secretary of State, can I just come back to you then? You said we may have the opportunity for a much reduced transport bill. Does this not take priority over some of the other things that you said in order to enable real change in the railways that many of us believe we need?
I agree with you completely on that one. What we want to do is to ensure that we can do that so that we will have it, fully legislated for in the way that we need to in the next session. So in effectively being asked to shunt ourselves 6 months backwards, we are not losing our ability to do that. We are just moving back a bit. But what we have been very clear on, as I say, is that those sort of small but important regulatory things which are literally stopping huge amounts of private investment that can go at pace. Lots of new sectors, we want to get that out as quickly as possible. So in prioritising, actually I've said that is more urgent to move other sectors.
Let's just assume for one moment that the necessary legislation is not able to go through in this session in order to achieve this. In effect, unless the department drastically changes its approach, we are therefore basically fixing the passenger rail industry, with the exception of open access, into a public sector specified operation. What are your thoughts and maybe views at this time, assuming the GBR legislation does not go through, to what we will do with the passenger railway? Is it to keep it in the same... Well, I mean, in my opinion, the current, my experience of my local operator, and I see from Avanti West Coast, which I think my colleague's going to ask you about a bit later, is it's just not working. It's turning into a complete and utter disaster in lots of fronts. But it is not, I don't think it's acceptable for that to continue without real change. And therefore, if we're in this situation where we don't have the legislative enabler, how will you approach the passenger operation of railways in this country? Will it be more of what we have today, or will it be something quite different and exciting?
So I only see this as a few months delay to being able to bring the, if you like, the overarching, the guiding mind, as we refer to it, sort of the new holder of the keys. But in the meantime, I mean, to your point about Avanti, we are applying a great deal of pressure and clear both support and demands on them to improve the service provision. I think, you know, we are all agreed that the way the franchising model works at the moment is, you know, not delivering what it needs to, but we need to be thinking closely, and that's obviously the challenge that Kevin Foster's got, is to make sure that we do that. With the hiatus will be short rather than long in terms of moving to the new...
But at the moment, we've got no firm date in sight in this current Parliament as to whether or not...
In this session, no. It will be in the next session.
So hopefully post-May, King's Speech, which is good news. Thank you. In the meantime, will you consider any sort of quite revolutionary approaches to operations of the railways, in that passenger timetables are specified by the Department for Transport. They are contracted and agreed by the Department for Transport. You therefore, in effect, block capacity by your specification. Will you consider removing some of that specification to enable more open access across our entire network that would, I think, encourage much greater private sector involvement in the railways? Because clearly at the moment we are, what appears to me, stuck in a rut at the moment, where the taxpayer takes full risk on the costs of the railway. Would you support that great idea to liberate the railways?
I love that liberation of the railways. I absolutely will take that away and sit down with Kevin and discuss it. I am not yet fully conversant in the minutiae of those issues, but I think that, you know, that's where we're trying to get to, is to make sure that we have got both the passenger and the ability to allow the private sector to maximise the use of our infrastructure in a way that is passenger and, you know, consumer focused.
Today there's a real risk that the department ends up maintaining direct control over the railway through its specification, and in my opinion the department is very relaxed on enforcing journey times. So, for example, what should be for me from London Waterloo to my home station of Sherborne 2 hours 12 minutes is now 2 hours 47. That's a combination of some short-term infrastructure issues, but it's also as a result of the train operator just pumping in buffer time into the timetable that the DfT accepts, and therefore is taking up capacity and preventing others from being part of the railway. So
take the challenge.
That's wonderful. So you'll take that away, and maybe you could come back to us and let us know.
And I'm sure I might send you Kevin, who will be the deep expert by then.
I'm sure there'll be some of us that'll be very, very pleased to meet you and talk about that further as well.
Would you like me to say more about where we are on our sort of train operations and contracting?
I would be delighted.
Well, actually, I think would actually. So,
okay.
Chris, you know.
So you make a number of points there about capacity, about open access, about performance and reliability. There's no question that performance and reliability isn't where we would like it to be at the moment. I don't agree with your assessment that the department is consciously, through its national rail contracts, blocking capacity. What we seek to do is to obviously optimise capacity on the railway for passengers in the interest of passengers.
Wonderful. Could you therefore tell me why the department...
Guys, sorry, can we just have one conversation at a time, please? It all gets picked up. Okay?
Could I therefore ask you, why is the department not rigorously managing those journey times.
So what we now do, as you know, under our national rail contracts which are intended to be an interim commercial measure, what we hope under the newly transformed railway in the longer term, we will have our passenger service contracts, which we hope will free up it to some degree, their sort of private sector innovation and input that we want to see in the railway, and that we do recognise, since COVID in particular, we don't see in the way we do because, of course, of the huge impacts on revenues and passenger demand that COVID's had, and the need now to try and recover the system. What we have under national rail contracts is a series of contracts with clear performance metrics for operators, which we then expect to hold them to.
But they're not being managed.
Well, I dispute that, but I would need to give you more details.
We will take
that away.
Take the challenge.
We will take the challenge.
Right to us on that point. We'll need to move forward.
We will take that challenge.
So, I just wanted to come back to you, Bernadette, if I may, on a couple of those points briefly. Open access operators are reporting up to 140% return of their pre-COVID market. Yet many franchised operators are almost incentivised not to grow the market because of the nature of the very contract. It's one of the reasons why I was asking a bit earlier about your approach and what you do. And one of the things that concerns me a lot is the last time we had the Rail Minister here with one of your colleagues, Conrad Bailey, I asked him very specifically about the future of passenger operating contracts. And I asked him very specifically about one part of the network, which I was aware was going to be contracted imminently. He told this committee that he had no idea about it. The Minister was not aware, yet within a matter of weeks, a new contract was fully signed up. That gives me a bit of concern that actually the department is not rigorously ensuring taxpayer value for money, and reference a number of the other points about concerns about tightly managing them. It then relates to my earlier point to the Secretary of State of saying, well, actually, if we know open access operators, through their innovation and so on, are able to recover much more speedily because they are free to use their innovation, they are free to, they have their access on the network, surely it would be better for us, both as a country, but for the travelling passenger, to have that flexibility and
I think you're making quite a number of points. You're obviously a great advocate of open access operators.
Not necessarily. I've never worked for one. I've always worked for the franchise industry, but I've experienced.
Chris, can we hear some?
I think
what
we are still working through. And had been working through actually on any legislative timetable is precise role that open access operators should have in a reformed railway. We do recognise that they potentially have an important part to play in ensuring passenger needs are met. As for current operators, contracted operators, it is true that that we are holding them firmly on costs, and what we want to be able to transition to is a recovered market in which all operators are incentivised to grow revenue and meet passenger demands in the most effective ways possible.
Is that not part of the problem, though? You're holding them to cost.
Well, there's
that's the real fundamental
we have to recognise too, don't we, that through the pandemic it has cost many, many, many billions of taxpayers' pounds in order to keep railway services running, and therefore it's important too that when we think about the railway going forward, the government will want to consider both how we deliver for passengers and how we get a great deal for taxpayers.
But you're specifying lower yielding routes and then frustrating the growth of high yielding routes.
I think it's a question of how we transition to a market which is recovered from the COVID pandemic. We are still not there. In terms of demand recovery and the performance levels we'd want to see. So there are still challenges, but I think there's a sort of, there is a plan under the rail reform plan, the plan for rail, to move to that more flexible and adaptive and passenger-facing railway.
I'd just like to move on to wider railway matters, if I may. The Rail Network Enhancement Plan, do we have any news as to when that will be forthcoming?
I'm conscious this is the question of outstanding publication of the rail network enhancements plan. I can't give you a firm date on that, and clearly, obviously, one of the things we're needing to do at the moment within the department is recognising now the growth plan and the challenges of acceleration that we're looking at across our portfolio of road and rail investments, is thinking about how we ensure that's reflected in the RNEP. But I hope that we are setting out in many areas of the RNEP some plans for how we're proceeding with those projects, and I can assure you, with the challenge of acceleration now ringing in our ears within the department, we're looking hard at how we can make sure those rail investments are being delivered.
Thank you. Secretary of State, I wanted to talk about industrial action, if I may, next. Could you just tell us how your approach will differ from your predecessor in terms of managing some of these difficult industrial relations matters?
Yes, so there's a number of things. Obviously, they are the negotiations aren't with the DfT. They are between Network Rail and the operators and the unions. But I've been very clear from, in fact, it was on the second day that I arrived, I asked if all union leaders who had a stake in various parts would come in and see me for a cup of tea. They have now all been in to see me for a cup of tea, and it's been really useful for me to understand where they're coming from, what the important issues are for them and for their union members. They are, an important part of the whole, and I'm a respecter and supporter of unions who do a good job for their members, but not the detriment of those they serve. So I hope that we've had some very frank and interesting conversations, and my door continues to be open. I've said to them that I hope to meet up with them on a regular basis to hear, how things are from their perspective. That I need all of them to work together with the financial envelope and modernisation requirements that we need to deliver for the railways, which the Network Rail and the train operators are negotiating and need to deliver for us. So there is a financial envelope which they can work within. But the reality is that, as the Permanent Secretary says, we've spent, I think, £16 billion through COVID keeping it all moving. And that is real taxpayers' money that's got to be, funded. And everyone needs to help us to grow the revenues again, and that involves the railways running as many of them as we can get on those lines, to your earlier point. So I've been very clear that I expect everyone to get around the table and to find a way through which works. One of the areas of real concern, and it's always interesting when you sit down with a open book, tell me what's bothering you conversation, was the issues around ticket offices. So I have committed very clearly to do a full review of all the ticket offices, and I do not expect that every single one will as a result be closed. And I think that assurance that I am personally going to oversee that and think very clearly about what the right solution is for how we use that resource at stations. When only 12% of tickets are being bought, ticket office, we can't say forever we must have banks of 20 ticket offices in every major. This is not logical or rational. Indeed. What I want, actually, one of the areas that has concerned me is around, the accessibility for all agenda. Do we make sure that those, workers who are working at the stations are able to, as part of their normal workload, either, be behind the glass sorting out tickets at some point. That is still an issue. Complex ticketing may well require that support, but fundamentally they're there to support people on the platform and, ensure that wider piece works. I look at my own little Almouth station. It's a one man, one lady, depending on which shift team. They do everything. They are the every man and woman. They do the whole shebang for the station. And to lose them would be genuinely impossible. So to suggest that ticket office should close fails to understand the dynamic of a very small rural station. Birmingham New Street, it's a whole different beast. So every one of these needs to be looked at properly. So I've committed to do this full consultation and reach a conclusion on what I expect to be that next generation of using those station workers in those effective way. And I hope that has given some reassurance that I am serious in demanding modernisation, but also understand the realities.
When will that consultation commence?
So we're just trying to get the ducks in a row, imminently. Yeah. I'll offer you imminently. That's the best I can give you, probably. Thanks.
Do you, in respect to the proposed legislation on minimum service levels, You're foreseeing that to come forward very shortly, I assume, is that correct?
We'll go with imminently for that as well.
Yeah, okay. Do you think that is likely to trigger further industrial difficulty?
So the unions have, they're all still running mandates within which they can call industrial action. We saw some more dates being presented for November. I think we are not at the end of the industrial action, but I hope that as the various people around those tables get together, they start to see a way forward that is realistic for all. You know, the reality is that the energy price guarantee has assured everyone, not just those who work for the railways, protections from some of the largest energy spikes, and that we understand, all of us, the economics of not allowing wage inflation to run away with us, because that has a very long tail to it. So we want to, we have to maintain. I mean, the reality is within the rail sector, we have to maintain wage restraint because I've already spent 16 billion just keeping it going, and the Treasury, notwithstanding the present crisis, is not going to sustain that sort of figure. So it has to be a realistic pay landing, and I hope that will be possible in the months ahead. But I will be disappointed if we continue to see that sort of industrial action, and indeed bringing in the MSL legislation will be a tool available if there is, total inability to move forwards between the various parties to ensure, as it says on the tin, minimum service levels, so that the passenger, the customer, can continue to get about. It is not acceptable to stop, children getting to education, people getting to work, all of those areas, draining the economy of its potential because of the need for rail to move people around is not acceptable. So we need to find a compromise and balanced solution which everyone can live with, so that we can get on with the executive point on growing that revenue again, because the more revenue we grow by people getting back on the train, the more money there is for pay rises in the future.
Thank you very much. Chairman, back to you.
Chris, thank you. Members, I'm very conscious of time.